Hello everyone and welcome to Guild Wars 2 Daily. The footage in the background comes in still from Guild Wars Insider as they continue on through their run through the Ascalon Catacombs. Hope you enjoy that. Today's going to be a mechanics episode. I've got 3 questions here that we can talk about. Just before I get into that though, for all of you guys watching me play through Winds of Change, I did start filming an episode today and it was my plan to get one out, but it turns out that the first quest of part 2 is butchered essentially in the hard mode version. So I've spent all day, essentially all this Winds of Change stuff you've seen me playing over the past couple of months, I just had to run through on another character today. So like that's what I've been spending all day doing, and Winds of Change will start again tomorrow. Sorry about the delay, but yeah. Alright, so the first question was asked by the Human Shields, who says, are dots saying where your enemies are guaranteed? Because in PvP, I really don't like the dots. It takes away any sneakiness aspect, i.e. a warrior sneaking around the back entrance. If your enemy can see your dot on the minimap, I feel as if I can't actually sneak around, which is something I liked in WoW. So, quite weirdly worded, that question, I suppose. But it's an interesting topic, and it's something that I really like about Guild Wars 2. The first game, and most MMOs, will give you a little compass. You know, not even MMOs, most games in general, you might have a compass there that will show you your local map, kind of where you are positioned in the world. And then it will mark on, usually, the positions of enemies. In Guild Wars 1, this was a big thing, and it's a convention that's in a lot of MMOs. But with Guild Wars 1, while this was a feature that seemed to add something to the game, that seemed to be this nice convenience thing that players would enjoy, actually when you looked at it, removed a lot from the game, a hell of a lot. So Guild Wars 1, I've talked in a previous episode about how actually I think Guild Wars 1 handled aggro very, very well. It's simply due to the fact that it didn't have a taunting mechanic, and Guild Wars 2 doesn't have that either. So there's no way to taunt enemies in either of these games, and that makes tanking a lot harder. It was still possible in Guild Wars 1. It definitely seems like it will be very, very difficult in Guild Wars 2 to just straight up tank in a traditional sense that you might find in other MMOs. So the result is, in these games, that a lot of the combat was a lot more interesting than just simple tank and spank. One person balls everything up and then they just get nuked down. It was always a lot more interesting than that because there wasn't a taunting mechanic. However, having said that, Guild Wars 1 for aggro was really, really simple when it came to engaging groups. You had your compass, right, which was your minimap, and in the very center of the compass was a small dot, and this represented your player's position on the map. As you moved around, the dot would move around, as you might expect. But around this dot that represented you was another circle, a bit further out, and this was your earshot range or your aggro radius. They were actually very slightly different. Earshot was very slightly less than aggro range, but this circle essentially represented this. And what it meant was that when you were playing Guild Wars 1, a lot of the time while you're playing the game, you were just staring at this piece of the UI, this compass, and you were constantly watching when the red dots that marked the enemies came into range of this circle, because that's how you knew you were about to be in a fight. And it never failed you. For the most part, no enemies ever broke this rule. They would always aggro you as soon as they got inside this circle. There were some situations where in early game, they were enemies that wouldn't attack you unless you attacked them first, but a good 95% of the content in Guild Wars 1 involved you just watching your compass and making sure you only aggroed one group of red dots instead of the other. And it made combat quite stale because there was never any uncertainty about how close you were to the enemies, and there was never any real excitement going on about your engages. Thankfully, Guild Wars 1 did offer players quite a lot of customization for their user interface, and it wasn't something most people done, but you could turn the compass off, and that's something I personally did do. Obviously, most people wouldn't do that because you are essentially gimping yourself then, and you're making content harder for yourself, and the game wasn't balanced with the idea of not having a compass in mind, but it was possible, and the game genuinely became a hell of a lot more fun for it. When you weren't sure if an enemy could see you or was close enough, and you actually had to use your eyes and focus on the game environment, it suddenly, even though it was such a small change, made the gameplay so much better. It was just absolutely unbelievable how big of a difference this was, just forcing yourself to not have to look at this little piece of the UI. That's what a lot of the gameplay boiled down to. You weren't taking in the beautiful scenes, and really Guild Wars 1 had nice graphics. For when it released, it had nice graphics, and when Eye of the North came out and Nightfall and the new campaigns did come out, they were pushing what we'd been seeing in MMOs at the time, and Guild Wars was up there. But the truth of it was that as soon as you became a reasonably experienced player, you were just always staring at this compass, and it was a horrible thing in the end, and it wasn't something that I think a lot of players realised wasn't great for the gameplay. Well, with Guild Wars Wars 2, there are not, to answer your question, any red dots on the minimap. You can look at the minimap, you still have a minimap, you still have your compass, and it will still show you your general location in the area. And it might mark other things, like the locations of merchants or armor repairers and so on. But enemies, it will never mark for you, and that is just a fantastic change. I'm really happy about that, and I was super happy as soon as it was announced. I remember though, a lot of people as usual saw it as a feature that was being removed, and they thought, oh, Guild Wars 1 had red dots and this was convenient, why is it not there in Guild Wars 2? And I think that for a lot of people it can be hard to appreciate that something that actually makes the game, in one sense, yes, less convenient for the players, can actually add a whole lot more to the fun and enjoyment you get back out of the game. And I like to come back to this example a lot when there are features announced for any game, not just Guild Wars 2, but there are features that seem to be an inconvenience to players, and people immediately think, oh, this has to be bad for the gameplay. One recent example would be the armor repair system and the fact that we have to walk to NPCs to get them repaired instead of being able to repair our stuff at any point during the game. I mean, that's an inconvenience for players, but I do genuinely think it will be a good thing that we'll now have more goals and more reason to go to new places, as I've talked about in a previous episode. But anyway, yeah, so there are no red dots on the compass. It's a fantastic change. I'm really happy with it. One interesting little bit of trivia that I suppose some of you might not know is that the Ranger, originally, it doesn't seem to be the case anymore, but originally one of the Ranger skills would allow them to see red dots on the minimap as they used to be able to in Guild Wars 1. So you would use the skill, and for a short duration you would be able to identify people on the map. Maybe not stealthed targets, and you raised the topic of stealth in your question. This is obviously very nice for PvP, for sneaking up on people, in particular for thieves and things. But yeah, that was a part of one of the Ranger skills for a while. It doesn't seem to exist anymore. I guess for a while ArenaNet were a little bit more fearless with their skills, but now in the name of balance they've decided to rein that in check, because that's kind of a weird skill effect that's not easily measurable against other skills, and I suppose they just didn't want that in the game. It certainly doesn't look like it's still there. It might make another reappearance, but if you look at the wiki and all the Ranger skills that have been observed in the beta so far, it certainly doesn't seem to be there anymore. But yeah, so no red dots on the minimap, and I think it's a brilliant thing. The next question was asked by Zolzalia Wolf, who says, I think I said that right anyway, who says, I'm very intrigued with the home instances. I like how some NPCs we encounter actually end up there as furnishings, and we'll be able to invite friends and show how we manage certain dynamic events. A very close friend of mine will spend a lot of time in game with me, and I'm afraid his home instance will look way more similar to mine as I'd like. How far can home instances be distinguished from one another, even if they took pretty much the same path? This is one of those disappointing answers, really, I think I'm going to have to give. At the moment, from what we've seen in beta, they certainly seem very unfinished, so we can't look at what's in beta at the moment and say that this is how home instances will always end up. But from what we have seen so far, there doesn't seem to be that much change that's going on in the home instances. They're very big areas, and there's definitely enough scope for there to be a lot of change in the home instances, but we're just not really seeing it. There's the famous example of the orphanage and the hospital, which one burns down, and that certainly seems to have an impact. But as far as meeting other races go, there really hasn't been that much permanent change we can see. Of course, in the betas, we've only been able to see up to the personal story for level 20, but I suppose the question is, you know, that is up to level 20. That is a quarter of the way through the content, and I would have expected to have seen more change in the home instances than we have so far. It certainly does seem to be a little bit underwhelming. I mentioned before, you know, one of these features that ArenaNet are talking a lot about being added after release is customization of your home instance with regards to player housing, and I'm a little bit worried that ArenaNet will eventually turn around and say, right, all of this stuff will be added together in this one big update. We're going to add more advanced player housing, and we're going to add more changes to the home instances at the time, because I mean, there are going to be 5 home instances. We've seen 3 of them, and none of them seem to have had that much polish put into them so far. I guess it all comes down to when you think the release date's going to be, but this certainly seems like one of those features that was really exciting for people that were looking at Guild Wars 2 as being a good game as a single player game as much as it was an MMO with real repercussions during a storyline, and it was one of those features that those guys were really looking forward to that may now be falling short somewhat. I was personally expecting in the betas this to be more finished, I really was, but there isn't much, honestly, that you can see being affected in the home instances. We've heard countless examples from the developers in interviews how if you save a Hylek, or you will at some point in your personal story meet up with a member of a lesser race, and you will get the decision to save them, and if you do, they'll be around. We've heard so many examples of things like that, but they just don't seem to be there right now. They really don't, and I am confident that eventually they'll be there, but I just have to have the same speech I had before about being worried that too many features might get put off to after release, or this could just be something to look at for us to speculate on when the actual release date's going to be, because this is certainly a feature that seems to like it's got a lot of work left to be put in it, while all the other parts of the game at the moment seem to be coming along really nicely. We'll just have to keep an eye on it. I certainly will be looking at as best I can when more betas come around. We've pre-purchased now, so we can look forward to checking it out for ourselves. Maybe it's just something even that the press haven't looked at that much or brought us much of, but certainly it looks very bare bones right now. The last question was asked by KKI Dot, who says, do you know how they handle respawns? If I'm killing spiders in an area, how fast or slow are they popping back up into the terrain? And is it based on people in the area? Could I get overwhelmed by spiders because a large group of other players are just passing through the area, or on the other hand stand around with a group of my own, waiting and waiting for another thing to pop up? Spawn rates. This is always a big thing in MMOs, right? Well, we know that spawns are affected by other players where dynamic events are concerned. So, in dynamic events, obviously, things are going to spawn for you to fight. There might be bandits, there might be spiders, like you say there. There could be anything. It could be a boss with loads of ads that pop up with him. It could be all kinds of different things. But obviously, the whole world isn't only populated by enemies that are a part of dynamic events. You also have random roaming mobs, the same kind that we laugh at in other MMOs that just seem to have no purpose other than to wander around picking daisies. And there are different respawn systems, it seems, in place for each of these two situations. With the dynamic events, very, very much so. If other players are participating in that event, more enemies will spawn. You can see some of the beta footage where there were just zergs and zergs of people as it first started, with just ridiculous amounts of monsters spawning in escort quests, and it really is quite funny to see the amount of monsters that can come in response to the amount of players. It doesn't seem to, the scaling doesn't seem 100% just yet, because a lot of people that were a part of the press beta have been reporting that when there were huge zergs of people around, the events became very, very, very easy, because ArenaNet just hadn't provided spawning information for that quantity of players, which could mean that at the launch of the game we're going to see some problems there with the amount, or rather lack of, monsters that are going to be around the area. But that is certainly something with dynamic events, and it seems to work quite well. What you suggest here, that you're doing a dynamic event, say on your own, and then a guild of people, for example, just run down the road, they come kind of near, and then there's that worry that it will make the event scale up massively even though they're not participating in the event. That certainly doesn't seem to happen. ArenaNet seem to have really nailed that down. That won't work. If that guild though does choose to come onto the field maybe that you're fighting on and participate in the event with you, then it will quick enough scale up so that the rest of the event will then go at a pace which is still balanced, despite the fact there's now 10 extra people around there. It does seem to work quite well, and I've not heard anybody complain that that is completely out of whack, which is definitely a very, very good thing. This is something that people would complain about if they'd noticed it, and they don't seem to have. As for roaming mobs, actually, if anything, I've heard that they spawn a little bit too quickly, but again, this could just be in preparation for the fact that, hey, there are going to be a lot of players around in the world, and if they don't spawn quick enough, then people aren't going to have stuff to fight, and the world's going to be barren. So I suppose that those things will respawn a bit quicker, but what I talked about before, how in Guild Wars 1, everything seemed to just aggro on you all the time, and that was actually a problem with the game. There were only very few enemies that would only fight you if you attacked them first. Well, the opposite's true in Guild Wars 2. Most wildlife, those roaming mobs that pick daisies, actually won't aggro you in the first place unless you choose to attack them, which means that they can get away with higher spawn rates on those roaming mobs because they're not going to be a nuisance to people who are just passing through or who don't want to fight. It should mean that while you can never clear an area out of wildlife for roaming mobs, aside from dynamic events, that you'll never run out of things to kill if you wanted to fight in that specific area, if for whatever reason you did want to grind and level up on a certain place, which certainly doesn't seem like something you will want to do in Guild Wars 2, but hey, if you did want to, they seem like they will spawn fast enough for that to be a viable option of gameplay, and that's kind of how they've worked out all of the spawning. And for the most part, my personal opinion, I think the spawning seems to be working quite well, although ArenaNet do seriously need to figure out how their events are going to scale, because that could be a big problem when the game launches and there are, you know, 1 million people running around in the game, possibly even more. They're going to have to figure that out. But yeah, so there you go, guys. That's Guild Wars 2 Daily for today done. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks again to Guild Wars Insider for the footage in the background, and I guess I'll see you tomorrow. Please feel free to leave any questions down in the comments section below, and I'll try to get to as many as I possibly can. We had so many good lore questions yesterday. It was so good. I can't wait to film tomorrow. But yeah, thanks very much, guys. I'll see you later.